Years 5 and 6 and welcome to back to this week's English learning journey. Week beginning Monday the 1st of February 2021. Now before you can access this video, you will have needed to have created your own fictional character. So yesterday's video will help you do that, and once you've created your character, you can come back to this video and access your writing for today. Now you can probably tell by my voice I'm quite excited about today's learning journey because we are going to be writing about our character. So as always, we'll start with a recap, then we'll have some learning, and then we'll talk about how we're going to record this in our learning journey entry for today. Okay, so let's remind ourselves then of our inquiry question. How do I create and describe an engaging main character for a story? Now you'll remember we're using the task wheel to guide us towards our outcome. So at the start of the week we were organising and gathering our ideas, we decided on our outcome, and then we started to generate ideas for our character. Now our outcome is to create an engaging character for a story and to describe this character. Now we've done part of the outcome already, so I'm sure you could probably predict what we've got left to do. We're using our learning journals at home in exactly the same way as we do in school. If you haven't collected your learning journal from the school office yet, please make that a priority ready for the next week. Our gateway this term is explorers. An explorer is somebody who follows their passions and seeks challenges in order to aspire to be the best version of themselves. We've been using our thinking column in our journal to record our reflections around determination and perseverance, and we've been reflecting on the impact of our writing techniques that we're using. Okay, so lots of children have also been using their thinking column to reflect upon our question, our outcome, and what they need to do to get the best possible outcome that they can. And some children notice that last week we were describing a setting, trying to create a setting in our readers' minds. Now this week we're describing a character. We want our character to be engaging for our reader. So some children had recorded this question in their learning journey as they were generating their ideas about their character yesterday. How do authors describe characters? Now I have a question for you, Year 5 and 6. Do authors use the same or different techniques to describe a setting and a character? What do you think? Have a think back to what we were learning about last week. Could any of those writing skills be used to describe a character? Or are they just to describe a setting? Now I'm going to give you a model text here, Year 5 and 6, to have a look at. Keep thinking about that question. Can we apply or use any of the writing techniques we learnt last week? Now I'm going to read through our model text, our example of what a good character description looks like. Please follow along and be thinking to yourself, do I recognise any of these techniques? Did we learn about any of these last week? Okay. A mighty stomp of gigantic feet shattered the silence as the beast came pounding out of the fog and into the darkened forest. Fire eyes glared out at its surroundings. Higher than any human, the corpulent figure flattened the twisted, towering trees with every awkward movement it made. Its scaly, wrinkled snout sniffed the air, and a strange rumble echoed so loud that it permeated the surroundings. Hugging the shadowy creature like a suit of armour were curved, spiked wings, which on occasions flapped frantically in the hope of scaring off even the bravest soul. Shoulders hunched, clawed feet dragging, it shuffled deeper into the murky shadows of the forest. It had no softness, no kindness, no mercy, and no sense. Dark and green, its thick, coarse skin rippled against its sinew muscles, and across its scale-covered body lay a jagged scar. Spikes as sharp as spears were positioned along its back and tail. A tail so long and heavy it could easily crush a human. Blood-stained teeth lay in its gawping mouth, revealing canines that glistened like a row of swords in the moonlight. One thought, and one thought alone, filled the tiny mind of this dreadful creature. Find him, find him, got to defeat the night. This monster was the Jabberwocky. Okay, you may know what a Jabberwocky is, year 5 and 6. The Jabberwocky was the main character in a poem, a nonsensical poem written by Lewis Carroll. And you may recognise that author's name. Lewis Carroll was the author of Alice in Wonderland and the sequel Through the Looking Glass. Okay, now I'm going to reveal here some of the writing techniques that you were learning about last week and in the last few weeks. Okay, and our question was, how do authors describe characters? Do they describe characters using similar techniques to settings or different techniques? So for example, last week we were focusing on vocabulary. Do you think an author has to use powerful vocabulary to describe a character? Absolutely. So let's look at this first sentence, for example. A mighty stomp of gigantic feet. Not big feet, not huge feet, but gigantic. So the author's picking their vocabulary carefully there. Shattered the silence. It's not quiet, it's absolutely silent. As the beast came pounding out of the fog and into the darkened forest. Last week we talked about using adjectives to describe our nouns. They've described this place, the noun, as being darkened. So absolutely, vocabulary, whether you're describing a setting or a character, is incredibly important. Now we also talked about last week about the verbs and adjectives. Verbs are our doing or action words. Adjectives are our describing words. Let's see if we can spot some verbs, powerful verbs in this first sentence. Think about how the creature is moving. A mighty stomp. So stomp is our verb. We can picture really clearly what he's doing with these gigantic feet. As the beast came pounding out of the fog. Pounding, how does that tell us about the way he's moving? So absolutely, those verbs and adjectives, whether you're describing a setting or a character, are incredibly important. We also looked at adverbs last week, and we were looking at similes, alliteration and sibilants. And I know that you were looking at those things in your reading lessons with Miss Hike as well. Did you spot a simile then in our model text? And can you remember what a simile is? Now, one of the similes that I spotted, there are more than one, so don't worry if you haven't spotted the same one as me. I spotted this one here. Spikes as sharp as spears. So the spikes are being compared to the spears. because we're saying they're as sharp as spears. So similes can use as to compare things. The other simile that I spotted is about the teeth. Canines, so teeth, canines that glistened like a row of swords. The canines or the teeth are being compared to the row of swords using the word like. So last week you were using similes in your writing about a setting. This week you could use a simile in your writing about a character. We were also learning about relative clauses. We've looked at fronted adverbials in the last few weeks. And some of us, not all of us, were thinking about ellipsis, the structure of our paragraph, and how we end our paragraph. So all of the things we've learnt, Year 6, about how authors describe settings can be used to help us describe characters. And Mrs. PA and I will be looking for people to apply the things that they learnt last week to this week's learning. Now, we are going to be generating ideas today, focusing on describing our character. Now, lots of you are still thinking about how do authors describe characters, so we're going to explore that together today. One of the things we're going to look at first of all is expanded noun phrases. Now, an expanded noun phrase tells you more about the noun in your sentence. Can you remember what a noun is, Year 5 and 6? Well done. A noun is a person, a place, or a thing. So I have two sentences for you to look at here. Please read the blue sentences and then have a think to yourself, what is the same, what is different, and which one is more descriptive and why? Okay, pause the video now then, Year 5 and 6. Okay, hopefully you've been looking at our sentences. So what is the same about these sentences? Well, I think both sentences are about a scientist. I think in both sentences the scientist is doing an experiment. I also notice that he starts to panic when it goes wrong. So what is different about these sentences? Well, our noun, the person, place or thing, has been described in the second sentence. Before the noun is an adjective. The scientist has been described as being determined. The experiment has been described as being challenging. So which one is more descriptive, Year 5 and 6, and why? I think the second sentence is more descriptive because more detail has been given about the noun. I know more about the scientist and his personality, and I know more about the experiment that he's doing. Okay, let's have a look then at a different sentence. The determined scientist with a furrowed brow started to panic when his challenging experiment started to go wrong. So again, Year 5 and 6, just think to yourself, what is the same about these sentences? What is different? And which one is more descriptive and why? Okay, so let's start by thinking what's the same. Well, they are both about the same determined scientist. In both sentences, the scientist starts to panic when his challenging experiment starts to go wrong. So what's different? In our first sentence, the noun was expanded before. We had an adjective before the noun. That's the same in our second sentence. We still have the adjectives before the nouns, but this time we've expanded after the noun, we've added further detail or more detail to the scientist. The determined scientist with a furrowed brow. So a furrowed brow, year 5 and 6, do you know what that means? A furrowed brow is somebody who's scowling or frowning. So we can now picture this scientist in more detail. He's a determined scientist who's frowning, his brow is furrowed, started to panic when his challenging experiments started to go wrong. So again, I think the second sentence is more descriptive because it has adjectives before the noun and the noun has been expanded afterwards using with. You can use with in your writing today to give more detail about the character you are writing about. Okay, let's have a look at another sentence. The determined scientist who stared into the microscope started to panic when his challenging experiment, which he'd been working on for many years, started to go wrong. So again, year 5 and 6, just pause the video. What is the same about these two sentences? What is different? Which one is more descriptive and why? Okay, so I think that both of the sentences are about the determined scientist. I think he's still panicking when his challenging experiment goes wrong. What's different? Well, this time I've noticed there is an embedded clause. The determined scientist who stared into the microscope. So this relative clause or this embedded clause is giving extra information about the scientist. It's using the pronoun who, the relative pronoun, at the start of the clause. The determined scientist who stared into the microscope started to panic when his challenging experiment, which he'd been working on for many years. Again, we've used the relative pronoun which to give more detail, more information about the noun. You can use relative clauses or relative pronouns in your writing today about your character. Well, let's really challenge ourselves now, year 6. In fact, we'll come back to the last one. I'm going to hold fire on that one because we've looked at expanded noun phrases. Okay, so that's one way that authors describe characters. Another way that authors can describe characters is something called show, not tell. So again, have a look at these sentences. What is the same? What is different? Which one is more descriptive and why? Mr. Nowborough marched into the classroom with a stormy look on his face. He clenched his fist tightly and shouted, "You won't believe what's just happened." Mr. Nowborough was very angry when he entered the classroom. He was so frustrated when he said loudly, "You won't believe what's just happened." So what's the same? Well, they're both about Mr. Nowborough. They're both about the way that he's entering the classroom. And he says, "You won't believe what's just happened." What mood is he in when he entered the classroom? The second sentence tells you. We know he's angry and frustrated. The first sentence shows you. Which words in the first sentence show you that he is angry and frustrated? Brilliant. He marched into the classroom with a stormy look on his face. He clenched his fist tightly and he shouted. all of those verbs and adjectives show your reader that he is angry and frustrated. Let's have a look at another example. Miss Wright was so happy when she entered the classroom, she could hardly contain her delight when she said, "You won't believe what just happened." Miss Bright skipped into the classroom, beaming from ear to ear. She waved her arms wildly in the air while she danced on the spot, singing, "You won't believe what just happened." Year 5 and Year 6, what is the same, what is different? Which one is more descriptive and why? Remember, we're thinking about show, not tell. So they are both about Miss Wright. They're both about the way that she's coming into the classroom. What's different? Well, the first sentence tells us that she is happy and that she is delighted about something. The second sentence shows us that she is happy and excited. Which words show us? Brilliant. She skipped into the classroom and she was beaming or smiling from ear to ear. Smiling is what we do when we're happy. So we're showing the audience that she's happy. She's waving her arms wildly in the air and she's dancing on the spot. Again, we're showing her delight. We're not telling the reader that she's delightful. We're showing through the actions of verbs. So let's see then Year 5 and Year 6. We'll skip that one, I think, because I've just seen the time. Let's see if we can apply our thinking about expanded noun phrases and show not tell to a sentence about our scientist. Are you ready? Sweat trickled down the furrowed brow of the determined scientist, who was deep in concentration. I wonder if you can tell me Year 6 Year 6 and Year 5 how he's feeling. How am I showing my reader how he's feeling? Sweat trickled down the furrowed brow of the determined scientist, who was deep in concentration. His heart beat like a drum as he glared through the microscope, hoping that his challenging experiment, which he had been working on for many years, had finally worked. Okay, let's think about our expanded noun phrases first. So we're still writing about the scientist. I've expanded by putting an adjective in front of the noun, in front of my character. I've used a relative clause afterwards, who was deep in concentration. I've kept in the part about the challenging experiment. So again, before my noun, I've got my adjective. And after my noun, I've got a relative clause. This time I put it in brackets. Now, how have I shown my reader that he is panicked? Because you'll remember from our previous sentences, we know he was feeling panicked. When you're panicking, what does your body do? How am I showing the panic to the reader? Firstly, there is sweat on his forehead or his brow, and his brow is furrowed. He's frowning. He's possibly a bit worried. He's deep in concentration. But he's starting to panic now because his heart is beating like a drum, and I've got my simile in there to help me. He glared through the microscope, hoping. Okay, so he's panicking now. He's really hoping that his challenging experiment had finally worked. So Year 5 and 6, we've put all of our ideas together. In these two sentences, we've used expanded noun phrases we've used relative clauses, and we've had a go at show, not tell. Now, your learning entry for today, and this is what it will look like in your learning journal. At the top of your page, you're going to write our inquiry question and the date. And our focus today is on generating ideas that are going to describe an engaging character. You'll have your thinking column on the right-hand side. The first thing you're going to do is write 2 or 3 sentences to describe your character, or you may challenge yourself, like our explorers, to write a short paragraph to describe your character. When you've written your first 2 or 3 sentences or your paragraph, you're then going to butterfly your work. That means edit and improve, just like I was doing before. You're going to edit or butterfly your work to include expanded noun phrases. Then you're going to have a go at butterflying again year 5 and 6 to include show, not tell. Your final sentence at the bottom of your page, or your final few sentences, will include an expanded noun phrase and show, not tell. You may even be able to challenge yourself like I did with my sentence about a scientist to include some key vocabulary and verbs, adjectives, to include a simile or some alliteration, to include some brackets or any other punctuation that you've learnt about this year. When you've completed your sentences, it will be time to do your thinking column. So in our thinking column today, we'll be thinking about these 2 questions. Which of your sentences is the most descriptive and why? What are your next steps? So how could you improve your sentences? Now year 5 and 6, that sounds like a lot to think about, but I don't want you to worry. Just give it your very best shot, okay, and send Mrs. PA and myself your sentences and your thinking column when you're finished. Good luck everybody, I can't wait to read your sentences.